Hello, everyone. I just want to do a quick video to review where I think you should be at this point. Where you should be is that you should feel comfortable in doing an ethical analysis from all three of the frameworks that I've introduced you to this week: the Kantian, the utilitarian, and the Thomistic, the Thomas Aquinas approach. That is, you should feel like, well, you could at least apply the basic principles of each one of those philosophers to do an ethical analysis from that point of view. The idea, again, in the ethical analysis four that you'll be doing for tomorrow is that you're not really expressing your opinion. You are simply doing an exercise. It's a thing in technique, really, to look at a scenario and then to apply the principles of a particular philosopher and to see what comes out. To see what the approach, in your opinion, would produce in terms of a judgment of a moral judgment of an action. So that basically means, first, as a Kantian analysis, to apply the catechol comparatives. Act so that your maxim of action can serve as universal law, and treat persons always as ends in themselves, never as a means to one of your ends. So clearly, if you were to approach a thing as a Kantian, just say that you were applying it to the Joe plagiarism situation, what would Joe's maxim of action, his rule of action, be in cheating the way he did? And then you ask yourself whether it can be universalized. That would be one way of judging Joe's actions from a Kantian point of view. The other, of course, would be to ask whether Joe actually treated anybody as a mere means to one of his ends. Did he treat everybody who's involved in this situation, everybody he was related to in this situation, did he treat them as an end in themselves, or did he treat them as a means to an end? If one were to approach the thing as a utilitarian, one would apply something like the principle of utility or the greatest happiness principle. And that would mean to ask whether he maximized the total amount of happiness that resulted from his actions and minimized the total amount of unhappiness. That is, Joe's actions had results, and it's the results that matter. It's the consequences of Joe's actions that matter. If, on the whole, they tended to produce happiness over unhappiness, then one would have to judge that they were the right thing to do or that they were good. If what he did tended to, in its results, and those results can be short term and long term, of course, but if in your judgment what he did tended to produce unhappiness, then I suppose that would be what he did would be bad from a utilitarian point of view. Finally, the Thomas Aquinas approach, which may not be as well set out or clear about what it means to do. Remember, Thomas's first principle is the good should be done and evil avoided. But for this principle to be of any use, we need to ask ourselves what are the good, what is the good, and what is evil. And Thomas gives us a way of thinking about these things. The good and evil are good is that which we are naturally inclined to, roughly speaking. Right? So what we have to ask ourselves in any situation, let's say the Joe situation, is what are the goods that are relevant? What are the goods that are involved? Well, there's certainly the good of truth and the good of knowledge. That's involved. There's the good of the integrity of the university. That's involved. There's the good of Joe's personal situation of trying to keep his life together, preserve these things which are goods for him, his scholarship, graduating, passing the course. All of these things are goods. To do a Thomistic analysis means to make judgments about how these goods are to be related to one another and which ones can be preserved and which ones, unfortunately, would need to be sacrificed. So to do a Thomistic analysis is to recognize what goods are involved and then make a judgment about which goods have priority over others. So the recognition that in a particular situation, not all the goods can be preserved. Well, which are more important? Given, in the situation. And you can do an analysis from that. Absolutely. Remember that your, this is again not your opinion, but you do need to make judgments. That is, your personal opinion is really of how these principles are to be applied to the specific situation. So it's not as if this is just mechanical. No, your judgment and opinion come into it, but that judgment and opinion are how these principles actually should be properly applied in the given situation.